So number one, welcome everybody to the Canadian Ethnic Media Association Speakers Bureau session. I think it's number 4 in line of our guest speakers, and we're delighted to have actually a SEMA member be our guest speaker today. And this is Marcus Kolga, who is founder of disinfowatch.org. He is a journalist, human rights activist, a leading Canadian analyst of foreign disinformation and influence operations. You've probably seen him on air with CBC, other television stations, Omni, of course. But he also, you've probably read his articles also, as he writes and comments on Russia and Central and Eastern European issues and disinformation in Canadian and international media. He's produced several documentaries that focused on international affairs and human rights, including the Soviet Gulag and NATO's ISAF mission in Afghanistan and challenges it faces from Vladimir Putin's neo-Soviet imperialistic ambitions. His films have been broadcast throughout the world. He's a regular commentator, and as I said earlier, you probably read his articles and opinion pieces in the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the National Post, the New York Daily Mail, Maclean's, Atlantic Council, and other European publications. And Marcus led the Canadian Civil Society campaign for the Magnitsky human rights sanctions legislation, and has actively led and contributed to similar efforts in Estonia, Latvia, Sweden, and Australia. He has spoken and testified in the US Capitol, in the UK, Australia, and Canadian and Estonian parliaments, as well, about the Magnitsky sanctions. And you've all received his bio, so I don't want to reiterate everybody that has received this information, but also most importantly, he's a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute Center for Advancing Canada's Interests Abroad. And he was also made member of Estonia's Order of the White Star by President Tomas Hendrik Eves in 2017. So welcome, Marcus. It's great to see you again. And
yes.
Thank you for taking the time to to actually platform all the issues that you are working with via disinfowatch.org.
Well, thank you, Madeline. It's great to see you. It's been a while. And for those who don't know, I mean, Madeline was largely responsible for starting my entire documentary career when back at Omni with the Gulag 113. So we're coming, around full circle here. And thank you for all that and all that you do for third language media, which is something I will get into later in the importance of it. I'm going to try sharing my screen here because this is a very visual presentation that I'm going to have. Can you all see the mountains?
Yes.
At this point?
Yes.
That's unfortunately not the view outside my window. That is just my secondary Mac screen.
Oh no, that's the view outside my window.
You're out west, that's right.
Very lucky. Okay, and now you should see the title of my presentation in a heck of a lot of televisions with disinformation on them. Can you see those?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as Madeline mentioned, I've been observing and analyzing and fighting foreign disinformation now for, let's say, nearly 10 years. And as Madeline mentioned, when I'm not doing that, I'm advocating for human rights and accountability for the abusers of them. And as Madeline mentioned, most recently, I helped lead the Magnitsky campaign here in Canada and have done so elsewhere. So there's a lot to unpack with regards to disinformation and misinformation and how it's being targeted in Canada, certainly by foreign actors. So we'll get right to it. So I have a question. So what's one of the first things we think of when we hear the words disinformation? It's probably fake news, influence operations. And let me make sure that I can get. There we go. Perhaps something connected to this meme that was very popular back in 2017. Disinformation and influence operations are part of what the Soviets back in the Cold War termed more broadly as active measures. And I think that remains the most accurate sort of general term for what we're seeing right now, including what's happening in this mural in Vilnius in Lithuania. So what exactly are active measures, or as they're known in Russian, aktivne meropryatия? This is what we're going to look at today. It's a combination of information warfare, the history of it, why we're under attack, how we're being attacked with various different narratives, the platforms they're using, the actors, and some of the things that we can do to defend ourselves against it. Now, a few definitions as well. When people inadvertently spread misinformation, they often believe the information that they're sharing. And they're doing so with the best intention. In contrast, disinformation is crafted and disseminated with the intent to mislead others. For example, if a politician strategically spreads information that they know to be false in the form of articles, photos, memes, etc., that's disinformation. Yet when we see an individual, or when an individual sees that information, believes it, and then shares it, that's misinformation. So here are two examples that I just found today very quickly. On the left is a social media meme promoted by the QAnon conspiracy that claims that the global elite are vampires who've abducted 800,000 children in the US alone to extract and then consume their blood. Pretty wacky stuff. Another headline on the right-hand side from 2019 suggests that our deputy prime minister and her family are all Nazis. Also not entirely true. Disinformation is hardly a new phenomenon, though. George Washington engaged in it through the Culper Ring to spread false information about the size and strength of his forces to the British during the US Revolution. On the right-hand side of this screen is a sketch of Benjamin Franklin in Paris during around the same time, when he wore a raccoon skin hat to carefully cultivate an image of a virtuous and simple countryman seeking independence from the domineering British. At the same time, Franklin waged a covert propaganda campaign from his Paris basement, where he set up a printing press and wrote articles designed to sway opinion promoting US independence across Europe. The Russian government's use of disinformation has its root in Soviet-era propaganda and intelligence operations. Disinformation, or desinformatia, as it was coined by Joseph Stalin, was formally adopted by the Soviet regime as a tactical weapon in 1923, when the Bolsheviks created a special disinformation office to conduct active intelligence operations. Disinformation became part of the Soviet Union's political and information warfare arsenal, and was used to manipulate and influence world events to benefit the Soviet Union. In September 1945, a high-level Soviet defection in Canada shed light on the operational tactics of Soviet intelligence services. Igor Guzenko, a Russian cipher clerk at the Russian embassy in Ottawa, decided to defect after the Second World War, taking with him a trove of documents about Soviet active measures in the West. According to a 1946 Canadian Royal Commission report, Soviet intelligence influence and activities in Canada started as early as the 1920s. They describe an organization in Canada that's, quote, directed from Russia and operating with communist sympathizers in Canada. Russian officials operating out of the Soviet embassy in Ottawa also employed Canadian civil servants and academics. A 1969 Canadian report of the Royal Commission on Security concluded that Canada remained the target of subversive activities, infiltration, penetration, and espionage, and can, quote, be used as a base for operatives against other countries, especially against the United States. The report defined Kremlin activities that ranged from, quote, efforts to develop front organizations to attempts to subvert individuals in government, the mass media, universities, trade unions, emigre and ethnic groups, and political parties. Now, the threats in 1946 and 1969 are exactly the same as those outlined in a report released just 2 weeks ago by the Canadian National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliament. Yuri Bezmenov, the gentleman here, was another KGB defector who ended up working for the CBC later in life. This is an interview he gave in the early 1980s about KGB tactics. I'm going to play this, and if you can't hear it, just let me know.
But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system.
So powerful stuff. This again was filmed in the 1980s. One of the most successful modern disinformation
عندنا هذه
operations.
الورك شوبز احنا ممكن مؤهلين ان احنا ناخدها وننشرها على مواقعنا.
Maybe
Sorry, can
Zuhair?
somebody mute their mic because you're interfering with the presentation. Thank you. This is a Zoom reality. Sorry, guys.
it's the most said phrase of the past decade or the past year.
Yeah.
One of the most successful modern disinformation operations was known as Operation Infection and was run by the KGB in the 1980s. The objective of Operation Infection was to promote the false narrative that the United States had invented HIV and AIDS as part of a biological weapons research project at Fort Detrick, Maryland. They first planted the story in a friendly foreign media outlet, in this case, an Indian newspaper owned by the KGB. Second, the story was then quoted in a Soviet medical journal, which was then quoted months later in Western media. The story continued to seep its way up through the Western media environment until it got here.
A Soviet military publication claims the virus that causes AIDS leaked from a U.S. Army laboratory conducting experiments in biological warfare.
That's March 1987. It's the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. So you can see how disinformation starts from a small, unknown newspaper and makes its way into the United States media mainstream. Remarkably, the entire Operation Infection narrative was actually recycled by Chinese government media last year to pin blame on the United States for COVID-19 and was further amplified by Russian and Chinese officials. So we've taken a look at the history of disinformation and tactics that are being used. But why is our information environment under attack? So why is it under attack by foreign agents? Well, on the Russian side, the objectives are similar in Canada as they are in most other Western states. They are first to undermine our democratic processes and erode trust in our elected officials, especially during this pandemic. They chip away at the trust we have in their decision-making and the health officials who are guiding us. The real goal is the polarization of our society, leading to a breakdown of trust and cohesion within it. The second sort of objective, creating doubt about our foreign policy and discrediting political leaders and activists who are critical of the Putin regime. Third is to turn public opinion against our sanctions regime that holds corrupt human rights abusers to account. I've seen this myself. Fourth is to erode confidence and trust in the transatlantic alliance and cohesion within NATO. And this includes undermining support for the Canadian missions in Latvia and Ukraine. For the Chinese government, the objectives are a little different. Their interests are indeed focused on controlling the Asia-Pacific region, both in terms of defense and trade. As such, they seek to promote Canadian policies that are favorable to the regime in China and business interests controlled by it. They seek to manipulate and control political decision-making processes, and they try to manufacture a favorable impression of the Chinese government and its policies. However, over the past year, China seems to have lost much of the control they had in this process, as Canadian media has largely awakened to this threat. Now, as Yuri Bezmenov told us earlier, the ultimate goal of disinformation is the subversion of our society. And one tactic that's used to achieve this is polarization. This CBC report by my friend Chris Brown demonstrates how Russian government actors seek to vilify the Ukrainian community in Canada using historical disinformation in order to turn Canadians against this community and delegitimize their status as Canadians. Let's watch this.
Dmitry Kiselov has a special place among Russian propagandists. He's the only Russian journalist sanctioned by Canada for disseminating what the government considers to be Kremlin lies. And for his first primetime show of 2019, he zeroed in on Canada and its 1.5 million strong Ukrainian community. They're the ones that dictate Canadian foreign policy, said the woman who's listed as a director of the Russian Congress of Canada, a group seen as being very pro-President Vladimir Putin. Kiselov's program visited a Ukrainian cemetery in Oakville. It's filled with the graves of Ukrainians who fought with the Nazis against Russia during the Second World War, which appeared to be the central theme, that Ukrainian Nazi descendants hold political power in Canada. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland and Liberal MP Boris Shizhnevsky and his family, dressed in their traditional Ukrainian vyshyvankas, were singled out.
And it was seen as a sign of, oh my goodness, see, we told you, they're infiltrating, they're,
So foreign disinformation also seeks to discredit and intimidate activists and officials who are critical of the regime, as we'll see in this Global News report.
Records labeled secret detail how cyber influence tried to ruin reputations. Subtle and overtly racist comments about Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan consistently appeared across Russian-language media in response to Canada's NATO mission in Latvia. In one case, when Sajjan attended a conference in Latvia, he was described as a large, swarthy man in a big black turban. As for then Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, in 2017 there was a flurry of media coverage about her grandfather's role as editor of a Nazi-controlled Ukrainian-language newspaper in occupied Poland. The intelligence documents say while domestic sources reported on the facts, pro-Russian media pushed the narrative to suggest that Freeland's family immigrated to Canada as part of a wave of Nazi collaborators.
Now, accusations of fascism and Nazi collaboration have been used against critics of the Kremlin since the Cold War, and they continue to this day. Exactly 1 year ago, after I wrote a piece about the Soviet occupation and the repression of millions of Central and Eastern Europeans and their families in Canada, Russian state media wrote a piece to discredit me, which included similar defamation, which provoked a waterfall of hate and threats against me on email and social media. A series of death threats were investigated by York Region Police, and the radical pro-Kremlin nationalists responsible for them, who would have been charged, but wasn't, because I declined. I didn't want to ruin the life of someone who had been brainwashed by propaganda. However, to this day, unfortunately, but also thankfully, I have 2 York Region officers assigned to monitor threats against me. So, how are we exposed to this disinformation? Social media. Over 70% of Canadians get their news using Facebook today. While many Canadians don't trust the information they see there, at least half of Canadians do. That's a very serious problem. You can see on that graphic that I've posted, and that's from our Disinfo Watch in a recent Statistics Canada report, it showed that at least 50% of all Canadians have actually shared COVID information online without verifying its accuracy in the past year. And that number increases as we look at older age groups. Algorithms also promote disinformation and conspiracies. These are algorithms that are used by social media to figure out how many people are looking at a certain piece of content, and that there are calculations that are quickly made to promote the more popular content. And they do that because it's in the interest of social media companies to make people stay on their sites and click on that content. Now, these narratives also play to our emotions, and that's what makes people come back to social media. Online platforms that promote fringe politics and conspiracy theories, and those are also shared on these social media sites and are becoming more and more popular, especially during the COVID crisis. Now, how do we protect ourselves against this? First is digital literacy, promoting good media consumption habits, looking at the sources that are being shared, not just blindly sharing them. Second is to check the headlines of the content being shared. If it looks too good, if it looks too interesting, you know, it probably is, and it's worth looking into and holding off sharing. If you see a photo, if it seems suspicious, you can use Google's reverse image search to check it out and make sure that it's credible. And you can also usually find the source of that image by doing a reverse image search. Finally, check the overall narratives that you're seeing. There are a few of them that are generally used by these malign actors. First is that those narratives, they generally tend to target the quote unquote elite. Often they attack the EU, they attack Zionists, and they're often anti-Semitic. Second, the narratives that focus on sort of primitive values to promote division. They're often targeting immigrants and LGBTQ communities, or as we saw, smears against millions of Eastern and Central Europeans. Third, with the COVID lockdown, there are lots of anti-lockdown narratives that are occurring, and often they suggest that the pandemic is simply fake. And going back to my first point, it's often they often accuse the elite of being behind this and being behind that it's a manufactured pandemic, and big pharma elite are behind it. Fourth, the newest narrative is that the vaccine will kill us and is causing a genocide. These are narratives that are just emerging. One narrative that I just debunked this week suggested that the vaccine actually jumps from those vaccinated to those who aren't and infects anyone the vaccinated person comes into contact with. So that's dangerous in many ways, just to put it mildly. So I'll leave it there for right now. Thanks again to Madeline and Seema for inviting me here today, and thanks to everyone who has so far joined us. I want to emphasize that the important work that you're doing, the service that you're providing for our third language communities, is truly essential to combating disinformation. Your professionalism as journalists, your fact checking is a primary and the lead antidote for this information pandemic that we're in. And I always tell Canadian officials and media that we need to increase our support for Canadian third language media. And so on that note, I'd like to invite you all to participate in a journalist-specific misinformation and disinformation workshop. I'm hosting this Tuesday at 3:30 p.m., obviously online. It's free, and it's hosted by the Journalists for Human Rights and DisinfoWatch. So if you go to disinfowatch.org and click on the workshop link under the digital literacy menu item, you'll be able to find it there. So again, thank you so much for joining me and watching. So hold on, let me see how I can get out of this and back into Zoom.
Yep, you did. No,
All right, I did it.
We're good.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus. That was quite a detailed presentation, and one that I know has piqued a lot of reaction. It could be controversial, but we're under a big tent. We like controversy as journalists. and very important information. And thank you for keeping on it. And I know you've been really on your own personal time prior to disinfowatch.org have always been dedicated to these issues and bringing it forward. And thank you also for encouraging all of us in doing our work as multilingual ethnic journalists in Canada. We're protected somewhat by policy. We have the 50th year of the Multicultural Act coming up this year in October. So a great opportunity to really applaud all of our work, all of your work, and a good opportunity to have a intimate and honest exchange with all of the information that you have garnered. And also, I'd like to reiterate that you are a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute Center for Advancing Canada's Interests Abroad. And certainly ethnic media plays a key role in that function as well. So I welcome all of our participants today. And so what we will do is open it up for questions. And just please raise your hand, and others will be muted while we ask the actual question of Marcus. So the field is opened, and certainly it's all questions are good questions. So who would like to ask the first question? Serge Yankovic, yes. You have to unmute. You're muted, I believe. You're muted. You have to unmute.
I do. I just did. Right? You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Marcus, thank you for your presentation. A very interesting one. And I have a question. It looks like you are already observing and doing this for years in Canada, right? So what's your opinion? Why we have in Canada and pretty much in every Western world countries, a lot of sympathizers of Putin regime? Just because of the propaganda of Russian states television and other media making a very good job, and we are not to oppose them?
No, I think that the job that you're doing is quite important. And I think if that you were not there, doing the job of telling the truth and telling and conveying the facts, I think the situation would be much worse. Look, I know that there are quite a few supporters of the Putin regime in various different countries, and in Canada included. That's perfectly natural. People are allowed to make their own choices and have their political preferences. I know in the Estonian community, certainly those individuals, boomers a little bit younger, there's also a certain nostalgia for, not the Soviet era, but certainly similar types of leaders as Vladimir Putin. We just had a very strange far-right government, which was, very much opposed to the values we have here in Canada, and a lot of them supported that. So I think there's a certain demographic that certainly supports that sort of a leader. But as I mentioned, when I talk to Canadian policymakers and media, I often say, people ask me this question as well. How do we fight Russian state propaganda? And I say, give the Russian ethnic media in Canada who do this work very well. Give them more support them so that they can provide a credible alternative, a far more credible alternative to what's coming out of Russia. And there's no way we're going to censor what's coming out of Moscow. We have the internet. Most people have computers, and they'll always access it. So even if we pull these sorts of programs off the air, there'll always be some way to get it. But if we provide a credible alternative, then at least we stand a chance of providing journalism, professional Canadian journalism, fact-based journalism to these communities. So I applaud you and the work that you're doing, and I hope that the government recognizes this more, and that you'll find more support for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus. And very much, your comments are very much aligned to a lot of the advocacy work that CIMA, Canadian Media Association, has been doing, trying to put focus on, support, advertising support, information support on COVID to third language communities, and certainly, to the commission with Bill C-10, making sure that it includes the multilingual caveat in that bill. So thank you for that, and that's a vote of confidence. Next question, please. Just raise your hand. Yes, Raul Dudnik.
Hi, Madeline. Hi, Marcus. I like how you pronounce my name, Dudnik, like a real, East European. Thank you, Madeline. Good to see you. Thank you, Marcus. Very interesting facts. I want to basically ask one question. If we know that there are, like, covert, more or less covert agents of Kremlin, also sympathizers of Putin's regime, definitely the government, the RCMP and CSIS know this as well. What do they do in order to, I don't know, not let them influence the minds of those who are, easier to be influenced here in Canada, Canadians who are pro or, not so pro-Russian? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Raul. Well, I hope that they're not actively doing anything. I think that those individuals living here who are pro-Putin, and I know it's sort of counterintuitive for some of you who know me to hear me saying this, but those people who are pro-Putin should be allowed to be pro-Putin. If they want to march around on the streets with, images of Putin and support him, we live in a free country. This is why my grandparents came here as refugees. They fled the Soviet Union because they could not do that in the Soviet Union. They faced terrible political repression. And so they came to this country because they could do that. They can express themselves freely. And I should hope that every Canadian should be allowed to express themselves freely. The problem is when you start crossing the line. I mentioned the fact that, I wrote a piece in exactly a year ago outlining sort of the Central and Eastern European position that, while I think we're all very thankful that the Soviet Union played a huge role in liberating Europe and paid a very, very heavy price during the Second World War. We also, I think that the Russian government also has to recognize that the way that they treated many of the millions of people in Central and Eastern Europe, I mean, they were colonizers. They were colonizers and they treated us brutally. When I wrote that, someone in Komsomolskaya Pravda, which is the largest tabloid and pro-Kremlin tabloid in Russia, wrote an entire opinion piece against me. And then I received death threats. That's when we start crossing the line. People can express their opinions freely and we can have that debate. It's when we start threatening people with death, when we start trying to marginalize smaller communities that we disagree with, to delegitimize them as Canadians and question their right to express themselves. That's where we have a problem. I'm not saying that any government authorities should be monitoring or should be curbing any of this, but we should be able to do this ourselves. And as Canadians, all of us, I think we need to respect each other and our values and our right to say what we need to, but also call it out if we disagree with it. And disagreeing with it doesn't mean, verbally or defaming someone or threatening any sort of physical violence. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Raul.
Oh, sorry, just to jump back. I wanted to know if the CSIS or the RCMP or the government do something for this disinformation going on, or they just wait.
Not actively. So, I mean, if some of you may have read the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliament report, this is an all-party committee that has been mandated by the government to independently review all of our intelligence organizations and the work that they're doing. And so we know through that there is clear monitoring of what's going on. They've also reported that there is a very serious threat. And they've done this 2 years in a row. CSIS is independently, in its own way, it's not allowed to say much publicly, but certainly the committee there's a 250-page report last year. At least 80 pages are devoted to the threat of the influence of regimes in Tehran, in Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, and so it's a problem. It's being monitored. But my fear, and I've written about this, fairly frequently, is that in fact the the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliament report this year that just came out 2 weeks ago also says that the government is not doing nearly enough to address this, and that if we don't address it, it represents an existential threat to our democracy and society.
Next question, please.
I think Paritosh has a question, Madeline.
Yes.
Hi, Marcus. How are you?
Great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Marcus. So the question I have is, don't you feel our political system also is equally responsible for the situation we are in? And I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. For years, I've noticed many governments, or rather many elected officials in this country from many ethnic communities, there have been allegations that they are used as stooges for their home country. Now, the question comes up very tricky is that it's a very fine line. Many political parties, whether it's conservatives or whether it's the liberals or whether it's the NDP or whoever, they have not shown any backbone, because at the end of the day, they treat those communities as vote banks. And you ask people from my own community, and many people will say straight off the bat that they are basically batting for X, Y, and Z. And we people in the community know it. And how does that play around? I mean, where does it stop?
Well,
I think, Elena, can you mute your mic? Because I think you're picking up your background ambient noise there. Elena.
Yeah, just a second.
Yeah, please mute until your question. Thank you. Go ahead.
So Paritosh, that's a fantastic question. It's the $1 million question. I think in Canada, we're living in a country, fortunately for us, unfortunately when it comes to politics, we are the world's most diverse country. And so we are naturally going to have these constituencies and communities where political leaders will emerge, across the board. I mean, I think every sort of ethnic community in Canada probably has some sort of political representative somewhere. And I know that, I'm friends with a lot of them, both on the conservative and the liberal side. And I know that they often get bombarded by these questions. There's an expectation within these communities that they respond directly to their issues, whether domestic or geopolitical. And when it comes to the geopolitical side, of course, it becomes tricky, especially when you have two conflicting communities. How do you resolve this? I don't know if you'll ever resolve it, because it's just human nature to do this. It's natural for someone, a Taiwanese Canadian, to be attracted to the Taiwanese Canadian who's a member of parliament or provincial parliament or municipal government, because there's a natural kinship there, and we can't. I mean, it's just normal. I think that it's certainly incumbent on those political parties to try and resist the temptation of going into a mosque or a church or wherever it is, to go in there and fish for votes. But again, unless and I don't think in our system, no political party is going to regulate that, because they all, as you say, they all engage in that sort of behavior.
And the thing here is that rather than keeping Canadian interest first and foremost, the line skews, and ethnic communities, or rather communities in general, are very quick to say, "Oh, but it's the community's interest." I'm not so sure. There's a very, very fine line with whether it's the community's interest over here or whether it's the country of origin's interest. And oftentimes, rather than giving examples, I'm just saying it in general, but oftentimes you see as Canada, we lose out our own interest because special forces are at play or narrow forces are at play that end up making an issue which is difficult to then entangle with. And I see it constantly played out with all political parties. So sorry, just to
no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I apply sort of, I see it through the lens of my Estonian community. And I think you're right. I mean, there's, I look at the Estonian community and it doesn't win me any points in the community by saying this, but there's this certain ethno-nationalism. It's not, pure nationalism, it's ethno-nationalism. So there are, as I mentioned earlier, we just had a government in Estonia that was, I would call it fascist. And it just conflicted completely with every bone in my body. I mean, it was against every Canadian value, diversity. It was anti-LGBTQ. It was racist. And I came out against it. But the core part of the community, especially the ethno-nationalists and a lot of people in the community, especially the hardcore members, really didn't like the fact that I was speaking up. I was speaking up in Western media as well. I think I wrote a piece for the Globe and Mail about it. And man, I got some arrows slung at me for bringing up this fact. But further to your point, I think that politicians, those of us with a profile and a platform, we have to put our Canadian values and principles first, and then our community. We love our communities, but we're here, and and I've grappled with this myself, but I've come personally to the conclusion that I'm Canadian first and foremost. And I think others need to do that as well.
Yep.
And I wouldn't impose that on anyone. I'm just saying.
No, I understand that.
Next question. Well, I have a question then, just following that lead. I mean, often, certainly in the Russian-speaking community and other Eastern Slavic communities, it's always been, like during the Cold War in Canada also, it's always been a dichotomous identity for the community. I mean, you would always get a sort of a backlash saying, oh, you're Russian, that means you're red, you're communist. And, trying to build on the identity of Canadian, this is my ethnocultural heritage, this is who I am. So as we get into this whole realm of, disinformation and dispute about international leadership, I mean, this brings in all sorts of issues. It brings in the church, it brings in religion, it brings in, community association overseas. So how do you fit that piece in to strengthen Canadian ethnocultural identity that needs a very strong platform in Canada, and that it doesn't get muddied with all the overtones? There's second and third and fourth generation that seem to be always, maligned because of your actual language equaling the culture, equaling the international perspective. So that I find to be a very difficult dilemma, and one that we've been fighting all here as, second, immigrants, second and third, generations. How do you see this resolving sort of in the bigger plane, in the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's such a good question, especially I think right now with the geopolitical situation that we're in, where there's so much conflict. If you look at the pandemic, all of that, what the Chinese government is doing, and certainly it's a terrible situation for I think the Asian community in general. What Beijing and the way that it's behaving, and the way that it's unfortunately, I don't think it's reflecting on. I mean, I think the entire Asian community is affected by it in a certain way. So, I mean, it's very difficult. I think the Russian speaking community the same way. One of the things that I've been doing, I was taught this, back about 10 years ago. A friend of mine, Boris Nemtsov, who is a very well-known Russian opposition activist and should have, quite frankly, in 2000 been named the president of Russia. But he was shot in 2015 because of his activism and as a leader in the pro-democracy movement. So Boris, who's a super gregarious, lovely, lovely human being and such a patriot, Russian patriot, and a really good friend of mine, he used to always say, whenever we were talking about Russian affairs, when it came to the Russian government, he always said to make sure that I have to, we all have to understand and make everyone else in Canada understand that the Russian government is not Russia. Russia is separate, completely separate from the Russian government. And so when we talk about geopolitical issues when it comes to NATO defense security in Russia, we should make it very clear that we're talking about the Russian government. We're talking about the Kremlin. We're talking about Putin. We are not talking about the Russian people. The Russian people that's who we're trying to help. The Russian people who we were trying to help bring human rights to, ensure that, try and bring democracy to end corruption. Whatever we can do out here, that's what we're trying. We're trying to help the Russian people. And it is not the Russian people that are causing the problem. And this is one thing. If you go through any of my the articles I've written, I've always made it very clear that there is a big distinction there. I think with I think that some media has done a pretty good job of that here. Certainly, the politicians I know understand that. I think with China, we still have a bit of a challenge there. We still say that it's a Chinese problem. The fact that Donald Trump was calling the virus the China virus or the Wuhan virus, that's problematic, right? Like that's making the problem worse because again, it wasn't the Chinese people that have caused this. It wasn't the Chinese people that have caused the situation in Xinjiang. We need to be very clear about that and make that distinction, because I think that, and I think most people would agree with me, is that most Chinese people, I think, would probably prefer democracy over what they have there right now. And I don't think that they support their government engaging in genocide in Xinjiang. So making that, I think it's important that we make that distinction. I think we're moving in that direction, but that really takes a lot of work, and it takes all of us when we talk to the media, when we talk to our friends in mainstream media, to make sure that they understand that as well. And I think it's really important that we do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Questions? Anna Kiapa from Ottawa.
Yes, hi. Thanks very much for this. I just have a question, if you have any idea how much the misinformation has impacted the reluctance to take the COVID vaccine, especially in specific ethnic groups.
Well, it's a real big problem right now, especially when it comes to ethnic groups that listen to, if we're talking about Russian state media, Chinese state media. There's been a active campaign both in Russian and Chinese language media, but also in Russian English language media and Chinese state media, attacking the credibility of all Western vaccines. And the motivation, the intent there is to make their own vaccines seem much better. This is what's happening. Worse than that is that we're seeing, and this is something I warned about in a report that I wrote some 3 years ago, that what we were seeing foreign state media doing, like the 2016 election, what we saw Russian meddling in the US, the polarization that it was causing. My warning then was that domestic actors would start picking up on these tactics, start using them, and then the Russian, or sorry, the malign foreign state actors wouldn't have to do anything. They just start amplifying this stuff, and that's what we're seeing happening, especially during COVID. So vaccine hesitancy is a huge narrative. It's really disturbing, because I have my morning patrol, as I call it. When I look through, I have various different dashboards that I look at to track social media trends on certain narratives. And what I'm seeing with vaccine hesitancy, with the anti-lockdown movements, the anti-mask movements, these things are only growing. And I saw what we're seeing in Alberta right now, this real crisis. I saw that happening about 3 or 4 months ago already on social media. We saw those narratives come out, and it's really disturbing where this is all headed. Because it's not just, it's putting us all in danger, these sorts of narratives. But what they are at their core they are anti-government, and it is a subversion of our democracy and society. The doubting and the erosion of trust in our elected officials and our health officials. If this is allowed to keep going, we are in real trouble.
Yeah.
Because that what we're seeing is a breakdown of democracy and of society right now. And my fear, I'll be completely honest with you, is that the government, who should be stepping in to help do something, is burying its head in the sand right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to say.
Well, I agree with you, and I'm concerned that in certain communities it's stronger because the rumors spread as well, and there is very little leadership in those communities to make arguments against it and to come out. So I'm just I agree. I don't know.
Well, and I would also add that one place where I think the government's really failed is in third language media. They should be setting up programs in cooperation with SEMA to start looking at this problem in third language, because no one's looking there. But think of the millions of Canadians who are getting most of their news from journalists like you. It's a place where no one's looking, including social media. Places like WeChat. A lot of people in the Chinese community have contacted me to say how much disinformation is being spread there, but we're not looking there. We just don't. I don't have the capabilities with my project at this point, and the federal government isn't doing it either. So yeah, I understand that it's a huge problem, but maybe this is one place where SEMA should be or could do some extra advocacy work with the government, is making sure that they're aware that this is a problem in our communities.
Yeah, and just to respond to that, I mean, certainly that's been an issue for us, and we've been doing advocacy work both federally, provincially, and municipally, and raise the flag saying, look, our journalists, our editors, publishers, producers are getting their information from traditional media, and that's not correct. And certainly we've shaken the bushes for, PSA funding for independent producers, for, having that information flow. And in fact, we had a meeting, I think 3 weeks ago, with the chair of the commission, the new chair of the CRTC, to bring that forward, that there has to be funding for independent language producers to be able to convey these important issues in a trusted voice, specifically COVID. So that has been quite the failing, and they're responding in dribs and drabs. And I know there's been different coalitions that have been formed, but all of the same message. So the Heritage Committee, they've been listening to deputations, and certainly that has gone forward. So that's, I don't know what else to do. I do know what to do. This is why SEMA has been formed, to be one voice and pushing these integral issues forward. And that's why, to that end, there was a coalition formed with the Canadian Ethnocultural Council, SEMA, as well as TLN and the Ethnic Channels Group, for example, and there's more coming on board. But this is the point, there's strength in numbers. So just to respond to that statement, we're there, and we certainly have had a letter campaign. I know Raul has had his own different campaign with independent producers group. So we're attacking this issue from all different sides, and hopefully that'll move forward. But this is with 50 years of the Multicultural Act, and many of our own communities, many of us, tried to move that dial forward. And here we are, not even having a statement in the Broadcast Act about multilingual, multicultural. So that was an answer, but that's turning into a speech. So I'm going to let.
No.
It's true. It's good. Thank you for saying that.
But sorry.
Yeah, Alex Gerstein had his hand up, Paratosh, and then you can follow. And I think I saw Renato's hand up as well.
Alex, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, thanks. Marcos, but what should we do if the significant amount of the misinformation comes not from abroad, but from our own official institution regarding vaccines that change their mind on the daily basis, as I see and hear? And I did get this information from the social media. You just open every single source of the media, like official media. So where we should go? what should we do? One day they said this, another day they said this, and contradict to each other. So
Yeah, Alex, I hear you. I know what you're referring to. I mean, if we're talking about the the Vaccine Commission and their contradictory remarks on AstraZeneca and Johnson Johnson. I mean, again, just in my personal capacity, I'm furious with that sort of thing. I mean, it doesn't take much to coordinate messaging. You know, it's a few emails, making sure that everyone's on the same page. Because I went, you know, when they opened it up to the 40 and up bracket, I drove down to my Shoppers Drug Mart on the Monday morning to get the appointment on the Tuesday morning. And I proudly announced online that I received this and that everybody else should receive it. And, you know, I asked my brother if he was getting his, and I probably shouldn't be saying this, but, you know, he said, well, he's concerned.
كيف؟
Sorry, somebody.
Hold on.
كيف ايش كيف بتصير؟
Yeah, somebody. I don't.
Hey, Zuhair.
Zuhair, can you please mute because you're interfering with the Q&A here. Very traditional issue. Yes.
Yeah. So just to shortly, you know, I my brother was concerned about the AstraZeneca, and you know, I pushed him to get it, and he got it. And then when this came out, not only did I feel you know, a little bit betrayed by the messaging of the government, but I also felt a little bit stupid for having urged my brother to get it. And I'm certainly not the only person. And so what do you do about that? Alex, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know. I think that in general, I think we need to trust the government. We need to still trust our health experts because, you know, 95% of the time, 99% of the time, they're getting it right. They are saying these things in our best interests. They're not trying to deceive us. I don't think anyone is, even though there's probably a conflict between political messaging and scientific messaging. And I think we need to just sort of recognize that. Maybe, I don't know. It's not a solution by any means, but maybe a way of looking at it.
thank you.
Sure, Alex.
Thank you. I think was it Paratosh next, and then Renato.
No, let Renato go first. That's okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marcus. I guess I have a question, but then I have a long comment I want to make after the question.
Sure.
Basically, you know, I guess what I'm wondering is whether we're talking to the wrong people. In other words, in this new era, it seems to me that digital literacy and education is really where we can make a change. And so I'm wondering if the question is whether you know of any special efforts are being made in high schools and universities to help people think more critically and spot disinformation. And what I wanted to say on top of that was that, you know, I'm getting a little depressed by what I'm reading in the news because it really starts to feel like authoritarian regimes are winning, and that we in democracies have a great disadvantage. And that is that we have this system of openness and this system of elections that requires civic participation. We get the politicians we deserve, in other words. And where are our critical thinking skills when it comes to analyzing the issues and so on? So we've got this blind faith in institutions, which are gradually being eroded. And social media is so easy for young people who are now hooked on social media. When they become adults and voters, they're using social media, but do they have the skills to really spot disinformation? So that's why I'm wondering whether maybe the effort should be more in schools than in politicians or our communities right now, because we're all adults and of a certain age, and we've sort of been educated, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I could talk about this all night. I think that is, you've asked a question that goes to the core of the problem. And, you know, I think you're absolutely right. We need to be talking to our youth, our children in schools, and teach them how to consume media in a critical way. We need to set up ways that they can have, have a debate about issues without screaming at each other. And I think that's what we've really lost. I think social media is at the core of all of that. We used to be able to go to, 30 years ago, we'd go to the newsstand. You knew exactly what you were getting when you picked up a Time magazine or a Globe and Mail. You knew where the fake news was. It was usually in front of in the grocery store before you checked out. There's the National Enquirer, but you knew it was fake news and you bought it for entertainment. We don't know that now on social media. When my parents go on to social media, they apply that same trust that they had in media 30 years ago to everything that they're seeing. And most of I would say, 90% of what you're getting on Facebook is shit. It is rotting out our brains. And these people know it. The people that produce the content and the social media companies, they're profiting from this. They don't want us to leave there. So they keep on serving this stuff up to us. And most of us don't realize it. I've how many times have any of us gone down rabbit holes on social media, and we're doom scrolling Facebook for, you look at the time, you've just been going down your Facebook feed for half an hour. They love that. That's how they make money. And so we need to get ourselves off this crack and get ourselves off this addiction. And I don't know exactly how to do that. There's a great article in The Atlantic last month by Anne Applebaum and Peter Pomerantsev. I suggest everyone look that up and read it. It is specifically on this issue and the fact that we need to figure out alternatives. We need to get off these platforms. And I think that, your point about educating youth and then taking a hard look and trying to figure out a strategy for doing this, that's and building communities, rebuilding communities, rebuilding dialogue, civic debate, having all of these. This is something that we're just missing nowadays. And,
I keep thinking
of work to be done.
I keep seeing in my mind Norman Rockwell paintings and how far we've come in our polarization. And for me, the enemy is polarization. The idea that things are black and white or simple solutions is such a fallacy. And that for me is the big enemy.
Yeah. I tell people that when they ask me, am I a conservative or a liberal? I'm neither. I'm completely nonpartisan. I am a rabid radical moderate and a centrist. And I just think that we're losing the center. That's the point. And my friend Gary Kasparov, he has a great initiative called the Renewed Democracy Initiative, which is intended specifically to start rebuilding the right down in the US. We could use that here as well, but thinking about how we can do that and stop the polarization, because the media is buying into it, social media, and our politicians, quite frankly, are doing that as well. They're contributing to the program or to the problem.
Next question, please. I can't believe that there are no other questions or comments.
Okay, Madeline, I'll quickly go. Marcus, the one thought I had always felt is that credible people are not stepping into the political arena and putting the hat in the ring. And people always try to compare that in the US system, you need a lot of money to vote, to run in politics. I'm beginning to think that even in Canada, good people, credible people they are cowed down by the money you need to run in politics. And how can we as in Canada find a good balance that you get people who really want to do good for the country can step forth and serve the country? And because otherwise you're going to have in all political parties, whether it's NDP, Liberal or Conservatives or the Greens, you have people who have the means, who are able to get in. And it doesn't serve us as a country at all to have these elected people at the end of the day running the country.
I think that the political process is absolutely stacked, certainly at the party level, trying to, from the nomination process, which is, if anyone's ever participated in politics or have friends that have, I mean, it's ridiculous, the hoops that you need to jump through, the money that you need to raise just in the nomination process, never mind the election process. And the parties themselves, especially, there's this one certain party that I'm thinking about where the center of the party controls everything. So they're going to place their own people into those roles. And so if you have a person from the grassroots who wants to run, but they're running against potentially someone who is approved by the center, whoever's running the party, it's going to be impossible to get there. So, there has to be some sort of election reform. I completely agree. We also need to make the Senate electable. I think if we can have another body but that would require us to probably leave the Commonwealth as well, because we'd need an independent head of state, and if we're going to become a republic, so to speak. There's a lot we can do. On the other hand, Paratosh, I would say that not all is lost. I know some incredible people who sit on both sides of the House of Commons, who are completely devoted to advancing the cause of Canada and of their own communities, and that the politics sometimes play into it, but they're really committed, and that's on all sides. This is NDP, Liberals, Conservatives. There are very good people. They don't always rise to the top. They don't always make it to cabinet and places like that. I mean, I'm gonna just name one guy, John McKay in Scarborough Guildwood. There's someone who's been in politics for 30 years. He's never been in cabinet. He keeps doing it, and he does it for the right reasons. And he's just, there is an amazing guy. If all Canadian politicians could be like John, we wouldn't have this problem.
Thank you.
And there are other conservatives too who are like him. Don't get me wrong.
No, I understand that.
Are there any questions from people who have not asked the question yet before we get into the second round of people who already asked questions? No? So go ahead, Alex.
No, I just want to say, Marcos, but you're familiar very well with the definition of Politburo.
No, it's we may be living in a democracy, but
I have another question. We haven't really touched on disinformation in the US or even in the UK. Can you maybe do a comparative analysis as to impact of disinformation from the US? We know the obvious ones like Fox News, etc. UK as well. Do you have a point of view, on those countries?
Well, certainly. I mean, if we're talking about foreign disinformation, the UK and certainly, the US has been the biggest target. And we can't really compare the impact of it in the US to Canada. In Canada, we've seen it happen. It was just, I think, about a month ago, we went through and researched over a couple of weeks. It was about 100,000 deleted tweets on Twitter. These were from accounts that were controlled by what's called the IRA. That's the Internet Research Agency. It's commonly called the St. Petersburg Troll Factory. So this is the outfit that was primarily responsible for the interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Now, out of the 100,000, or sorry, it was about 80,000 deleted tweets that we looked through. There were, I would say, roughly 10,000 that targeted Canadian issues. So it demonstrates, we're targeted far less than the US, but we still are a target of that foreign type of disinformation. Now, if we're getting into this, the domestically created disinformation and misinformation, the US environment is just toxic right now because of the polarization that was created already in 2014, 2015, 2016. That splitting of societies, creating racial divides, and the amplification by foreign actors, that's only increased. And then you had this president who came around and only made things worse. That divide just kept on growing. And so if we thought Fox was bad, of course, we saw the development or the creation of these new media platforms that were going further right and amplifying, even more outlandish disinformation. And I'm not sure right now we saw the result of that on January 6th in Washington, D.C. This is what happens when countries become so polarized. They start turning against themselves. This is happening in Canada. It's happening here. Again, on my morning patrols through my social media accounts that I've targeted to monitor, that the Wexit movement is a perfect example of that. So, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Wexit movement. This is a Western separatist movement. It's basically people between BC and Saskatchewan approximately, primarily located in Alberta. These are people who want to separate from Canada because, there has been a certain degree of Western alienation. But the narratives that are being promoted there are very violent. They're often memes about hanging our elected officials, the current government. And we're not talking about, a few thousand people. These are Facebook groups and accounts that have 500,000 users. There are a lot of people who have bought into these narratives, and they're only growing. So, and I equate this very much with that same they're borderline QAnon supporters, but certainly anti-government. And so, with these movements growing, I think that the problem in Canada, although it's much smaller than what we're seeing in the U.S., it's only growing here, and it's only going to. I fear that we're headed eventually to our own January 6th moment at some point within the next 12 to 24 months.
Oh, that's a strong observation, and I'm hoping that does not come to fruition. But thank you for that. Other comments or questions from those who have not asked questions or commented? Avril Maroon. Yes.
Marcus, I've been fascinated by the Svengali control that Donald Trump has in the US, and in particular over Republicans. And is that because of misinformation that he spews or disinformation? Does he know what he's saying when he says some of the things he says? Or is he really just, that clever and that smart that he's manipulating people that well?
I think he's pretty clever. I think he's surrounded by fairly clever people. Steve Bannon is an evil genius, and Bannon was really the guy that was behind a lot of these strategies, and he was. I mean, we thought that he disappeared, but on election day, I mentioned that we had this crazy right-wing government in Estonia. I was monitoring where some of their leaders were, and they were in Washington, and they were actually on election night. They were meeting with Steve Bannon, along with other far-right leaders from around the world. We're talking about, from the AfD in Germany, the Alternative für Deutschland. They're basically neo-Nazis in Germany. The French Front National was there, and so it's being orchestrated. I don't think it's Trump himself, but Trump has I think he's been very good to these extreme right. I wouldn't even call them extreme right. I mean, these are extreme populists. I'm not sure that Steve Bannon has any sort of ideology except for himself and the destruction of America. And so they've found a very convenient puppet in many ways with Donald Trump, and he's more than happy to go along with it. But people like Bannon and certainly Donald Trump, he knows how to play into the emotions of this massive base that they have. And it's just feeding on that emotion. It's the same thing that social media giants do. Now they're not, the objective isn't the same, but the tactics are. They're speaking in the same way, using those same platforms, and it's fear, emotion, all of those. That's what's being used here. And so, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, Trump. I'm not sure that it's Trump himself, but it's certainly the people around them, and that movement is clearly not going away anytime soon.
Oh.
Hate and fear are powerful emotions.
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah.
God, I'm sorry. I don't know if your other speakers are, always this gloomy.
That's why we enjoy the diversity of the range of our speakers. So we live diversity even through our speakers bureau, for sure. So not at all gloomy, but I think very much a realistic, candid snapshot of what's going on there. And we've all seen pieces of it, but this is a great opportunity to see the cumulative sort of, picture, picture and experiences, of course, that you've spoken to. Other questions from our participants? I don't see any.
I have one more, if I may.
Very good. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious about Yuri Bezmenov. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. So in that clip, he was talking about some of the steps that the then KGB was using, and it started off with this first the demoralization, the generational sort of change. Do you happen to know what the next 3 steps were in his list? I'm just curious.
I'd have to go back to the video. I haven't actually watched the full video in quite some time. But I would encourage you to just look up Yuri Bezmenov online, and that YouTube video comes up, and it's remarkable when you watch it. And I remember first watching it. It was maybe around 2014, 2015. And a lot of us who were, I guess the original sort of experts on foreign disinformation, or the ones that were monitoring it early on. And if you watch that, it was just like, this guy knows exactly what he was, he knew what he was talking about. And these are the tactics that they're using today. And it's quite terrifying how accurate he is.
I was just thinking,
look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, because I think if we know what those tactics are, it's easier to spot them, theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, I mean, I can't remember exactly what they were, but it's I mean, ultimately it's the subversion of our democracy. It's exactly what's happening right now, where it's the erosion of trust, the breakdown of trust, and the cohesion within our society. Those are the ultimate steps. And I sort of recall the final outcome really is civil war. That's what the Russian intelligence is looking to do. And one of the things that I say in whenever I talk about sort of what happened in 2016 in the US is that that the chaos that we saw happen then, and the subsequent chaos that we saw the following 4 years, that was really demoralizing. What we're seeing is a breakdown of American democracy. And Yevgeny Prigozhin, the guy that runs the Internet Research Agency, and Vladimir Putin were able to do all of that, like to cause that sort of destruction. For the overall cost was less than a Russian battle tank. Yeah. That's pretty impressive. That's a lot of bang for your buck. And the problem that we have is that we haven't imposed a consequence or a cost. So these same actors are able to continue doing this stuff without a cost. I mean, the cost of employing people to work for you in Ghana or wherever these new outfits are that they've set up. But the real cost, there is no deterrence. In nuclear war, there's deterrence. In conventional war, in kinetic war, there's deterrence. In information warfare, right now we haven't offered a credible deterrence. So it's just they're going to continue doing it.
Do you think the Americans are going to take a page from that and try to do the same within Russia?
I'm not sure that morally you can do that. I'm very much against counter sort of disinformation. Certainly at that level where you're targeting entire populations. If you're talking about Vladimir Putin, I mean, it's always been part of warfare. So, I mean, they're going to do it to a certain degree. I just, if you're looking at a country like China, for example, there's no way in. You can't. There are 3 main channels, internet channels going into that country. The government controls all of them. So there's no opportunity there. I think the best that we can do with regards to Russia is supporting these opposition leaders, human rights activists, those who are promoting democracy and the rule of law, And if we can somehow help them and, you know, impose sanctions on the bad guys and raise the cost, I think that's the best way that we can challenge them and push back.
Thank you.
Sure. Good question.
Next question. Any other questions from the group? Yes, Olga. Olga Knopka. You're muted. Unmute, please. There you go. Great.
Hi, hello. So thank you for this lecture. It's really actually very important and interesting. And my question goes, in the recent months, we really felt like the Russian propaganda machine and disinformation is really ramping up. And we encountered situation like when our articles are being quoted and basically twisted to support the some information like coming from inside Canada. So I was just wondering if there are any recommendations or tools that maybe could be recommended for us, not to avoid this situation. So just let me explain again. It's certain article that we publish is being twisted and we are being quoted as the source for this information by some other like, let's say, pro-Putin or pro-Russian agency outside of Canada. So are there any tools for us to fight this?
Well, first of all, going back to your initial point that yes, I can see that disinformation and propaganda has amplified, because I think the regime is terrified right now of what Alexei Navalny represents. And obviously the protests that have been happening, the one in January where you had kids on the street in Vladivostok, which was just, brought tears to my eye to see this sort of movement happening. It was amazing. But you're right. We've seen this sort of ramping up of propaganda and disinformation all over the place. As for your own situation, geez, it's tough. What you have is a government and potentially platforms that are aligned with it that don't respect laws. So you can tell them don't do it, and there's no reason why they would respect your request. You could call a lawyer in Moscow or St. Petersburg. I'm not sure that it's worth the cost. The only thing that I would say is that maybe printing an example or a list of articles where you've been misquoted to counter that in your own publication. That may be one way at least for your own readers to get around that. Or if you're online, having a link to just, and this is much of what I do with Disinfo Watch, is basically taking an instance where, say Komsomolskaya Pravda has taken your article, twisted around. You can say that in this instance, here's the date, here is the link to where they did it. Here is how they've manipulated our article. I think that's probably the only way to do it, and keep a running list of that so that your own viewers can see how that sort of propaganda and disinformation is how you're being manipulated, and how essentially your readers may also be being manipulated by that. Other than that, I don't know how you would address this how you would address it with a Russian-based platform.
Okay, thank you.
It's horrible to hear that's happening.
Yeah, it's actually, it was when we did a coverage of the Navalny protest in Toronto. So that's when we got misquoted, and that's what happened.
Yeah, we should talk offline. It sounds like there could be an interesting project here of tracking that sort of a thing on a broader scale, and talking to other media as well, and keeping an eye
that would be great.
When that happens.
Yeah, we should do it, definitely.
Yeah.
I'd
be very much interested.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's a great suggestion to continue the conversation offline. And I think that really brings to a nexus, the whole issue, the role of ethnic media, Canadian ethnic media, where, the objective is to export, to, platform Canadian values in one's, language of comfort, also be a bridge sometimes to international news. But then there you get this situation like this, where it's flipped and where it's used towards. So that really is an issue, I think, of 2020, 2021, and that really brings it to a new level. And people always wonder, what is the role? We know what the role is of Canadian ethnic media, but now here's a new dimension to this. So I think that would be wonderful if that conversation can be continued.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Oh yes, Sergey, yes. Go ahead. Oh, you have to unmute. There you go.
Yes, I just did. It's not. I hope I don't have a question, but I'd rather have a little bit echoing the Renato question about what Russians do after they influence for a few generations, spreading their ideas, etc., etc. So they do. They try to influence elite in different countries. Let's say these days we have in Europe some leaders like President of Czech Republic or Prime Minister of Austria or ex-Chancellor of Germany, who is actually getting money every year from Putin, or maybe monthly, because he's in one of the big oil company, one of the show directors or something like that. So they influence through the, buying and bribing elite in different countries, and they do it quite successfully.
Yes. Well, there was actually a chunk of my lecture which actually addresses that I took out from this lecture, where I speak to that in the Canadian context, and this is very much, it's happening here as well. It's certainly, I think the companies like Huawei and Chinese government are really good at that elite capture is what it's called. The Russian government has also been actively doing this, but they haven't been able to connect with any former real cabinet ministers or MPs, but who they do attract are academics, and fairly well-known academics, and former diplomats. If you go through sort of the list of diplomats who served in Moscow in the 1990s, you'll find that a lot of them are working with a lot of Russian companies, large state-run organizations, with associations. Some of them have been given board memberships, chairmanships of boards of Russian resource companies. And so when you see that on one side, and then you hear how they comment on various European and Russian affairs, it's clear that they've been influenced by the positions that they receive. There's one fairly well-known university professor in the Ottawa area who serves on President Putin's Valdai Club advisory board. So this is President Putin's own sort of personal think tank, and he's one of 5 advisory board members. So it happens here as well. It's not quite at the Gerhard Schroeder sort of level, but it's something that happens here, and I think that we also need to be a bit more aware of it. And I think that, quite frankly, I've been on the forefront of exposing a lot of these people. I've taken a lot of hits for it, and have run into a lot of trouble because of it. But I think that we're okay, so to speak, in Canada right now with regards to that on the Russian side. I can't speak to the Chinese side of things, though. I think things have been quite bad there, but I think they're getting better too.
Yeah, and my understanding is that national newspapers like the Globe and Mail, CSIS, and others are quickly catching on that this is a credible potential threat to our public discourse and our policies, right? So I think the fact that we know about it more and more should be helping us as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Globe is doing a great job. In fact, Stephen Chase just messaged me during the lecture that he has an article coming out, and you should all go and look at it in the Globe and Mail about Russian sanctions that I contributed on. And so you have people like Steve and Robert Fife and Mark McKinnon who really are doing a great job, and Nathan Vanderclip is doing an amazing job on China. When you have people like that doing this sort of work, yeah, I mean, it's exposing a lot of it, and that's all it needs. I mean, it's a bit of sunlight, and we need, more journalists should be doing that in Canada.
Absolutely, thank you for that, and not even to bring in the whole situation in Belarus, only because I have to, because that's my background. So that's a whole different discussion that would probably bring us into another hour of discussion. But that's certainly a watch file, and looking at the incarceration of demonstrators, and not even vehement demonstrators, just standing there holding a national flag. So that's another whole watch file, and certainly I know you've been involved in some of the issues there as well. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that we need to keep an eye on. And it's one area where I think Canada has been okay when it comes to pushing back on human rights. I think we haven't done such a great job on most files, but on that one, we did pretty well. And I think we committed, it was just before Christmas, was it Minister Garneau or Champagne at the time, committed $3 million to promoting and strengthening civil society in Belarus. And this is quite frankly, and I'm looking at Madeline, is one place where I think Canada and certainly CIMA can play a big role is promoting independent media in Belarus. This is, I mean, I think you've seen the protests. We've all watched the protests. The crackdown on independent journalists in Belarus is just terrifying. The way that it's happened, it's violent. The torture that's happening in the prisons is brutal. And I think I think that the Canadian government wants to help in this area, and it's one place where we do have some expertise when it comes to independent media, and any support that we can give them, and certainly, if there is some way for CIMA to help the situation and these independent media providers and specifically independent journalists, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a watch file and something to work on in the future. Well, this, I don't know if there are any other comments or questions. We promised Marcus that we would end around 8:30, and we're 6 minutes over. But I think, I hope I speak on behalf of everybody participating and all of the board members and members that wish you are one as well. And we're very proud of that this really was a stimulating discussion, and one that, fires us to keep on doing what we're doing and fighting the fight. Not only in the front of ethnic media, but certainly how Canadian values can certainly link to moving and being progressive in countries other than Canada. So we thank you for your time, but also would like to reiterate and promote the exclusive workshop that you have offered to members of CIMA, which has the suggested date and time is March the 11th at 3:30 p.m.
May the 11th?
May the 11th, yes. May the 11th at 2:30. And so hopefully those who are interested can certainly join. It would be great if we can get an idea of who is wanting to participate and who would be available. So let CIMA know. So that would be great. And thank you for that offer. Most appreciated.
Sure, and if you can pass that along to any other journalists that independent journalists. It is a journalist sort of focused workshop that looks at tools and techniques that we can use in our everyday work to track disinformation and investigate specific instances.
No, very good. So this is a free offer. So to our members, free. That's always an important word somehow. I do it. So, and exclusive. So, and we'll pass that around. So we'd like to thank Marcus Kolga of disinfowatch.org for an inspirational discussion, and one that really is a great thought starter and a motivator for all of us in continuing our work and continuing the fight on all levels.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's such an honor to speak with you. The work that you are doing is so important. I cannot stress that enough. It's having an impact, and we need more of it. So please do keep up the fight.
Well, thank you. And on that note, thanks everybody for joining in. And I have to say that these virtual Speakers Bureau are comfortable in the sense that nobody has to travel downtown. You don't have to fight traffic, and here we are having that great interaction. So there is a silver lining in this whole pandemic. So that's one of them.
This became even more productive than before.
Yeah.
I don't want to be cynical, but
yeah, well, just practical. That's true.
just practical.
Yeah. So good seeing everybody. Thank you everybody for participation, and thanks again, Marcus, for joining us and sharing with us all of your hard work and the results that are coming out of that.
It was good to see you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Marcus.
Madeline. Thanks, Renato.
See
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care. See you.
Have a good weekend.
That's most important.
Bye.
Yes. Thanks.